Thank you. We're continuing our meetings this afternoon. I would like to call to order the special meeting of the Glendale City Council for September 21st, 2010. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members: Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here. And we have your report.
The notice for this special meeting was posted last week on September 16, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. This is a special meeting of the City Council of the City of Glendale, and the item before you is Director of Public Works regarding Transit Fund and Transit Services Review.
Thank you. Mr. Starbird.
Zern, Director of Public Works.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're here before you this afternoon as somewhat of a continuation of a discussion that we initiated during our budget review sessions earlier this year. At that time, I had given an overview of our enterprise and special revenue funds and focused on our transit fund, which, while lauding its various merits and its success since its implementation in 1984, also indicating that we had reached a point where we needed to make some critical decisions regarding the future of the fund. This operation, our transit operations, are funded and financed primarily through voter-approved sales tax measures in Proposition A and C. We also receive and have received over the years quite a bit of grant funding, primarily for our capital, and to a lesser degree we have revenue in the form of fees or fares. We have a finite resource, and we're beginning to reach the end of that resource. And while we are very proud of the service we provide, we need to make sure that we're living within our means. In some respects, I think I mentioned we are almost a victim of our success. We have dedicated all of our transit fund money, Prop A and C, to our transit operations, both the Beeline fixed route service and our dial-a-ride service. I say that because many communities over the time that these two revenue sources have been in effect have used those funds for various other means than just transit, including capital and infrastructure improvements. We've poured virtually all of this money into our transit operations, and it's been very successful. We carry quite a few passengers. I actually started in the city managing the Beeline system, which was a couple 100,000 passengers a year, and now we carry over 2 million. So we've grown. It's been successful. However, again, we're at a point where we need to look at different service provisions and our fare structure so that we can set ourselves on solid financial ground for the future. That's our objective. So with that said, today we have staff here, Mr. Bagdanian, our Traffic and Transportation Administrator, and Ms. Engel, our Transit Manager, who's going to be the individual primarily going over this presentation. We've given you a copy. It's a little bit, I know at this time, we're a couple hours past where we wanted to be, but we are not going to spend a lot of time through a majority of this. We're going to give you an overview of our line-by-line analysis, which just basically says we went through an analysis of each and every one of our lines and ridership and whether it was overutilized, underutilized, and we're going to touch on those. We're also going to give you just a very brief forecast of the budget. I think I did that in a nutshell right now by saying we're at a point where we need to make some decisions. Financially, we're beginning to hit the wall, so to speak, expending all or more than we have for the services that we're providing. Go over briefly those current challenges, and then get to really what the heart of the presentation is, and that's to explore with you fund balancing strategies. And we developed what we hope is a palatable schedule of options that both touch on service provision, restructuring, and fare restructuring. We would love to continue to provide the level of service we do and love to keep it at the fare that we have now, which is 25 cents. But as time has gone on, we think that we need to adjust in both those areas to continue to make this a viable operation for the future. So, not wanting to go too heavy-handed on either end, I think we've come up with a pretty fair balance in both service provision and in fare structure. But of course, those are the things that we need to discuss and that ultimately get direction from the City Council on which way they'd like to have us pursue. So with that said, let me have Ms. Engel start off by going through the presentation, and then we'll get to that point.
And just in terms of time management, because we've got council meeting at 6. I don't know where we're going to fit our time capsule.
Well, I've had
Have to.
It was put this report, it is.
I've had ongoing dialogue with Mr. Bagdanian and Ms. Engel as we've gone through this. So we've continued to shorten this through this afternoon. So when I say she's going to go quickly through this, Ms. Engel is really going to fly through the line-by-line analysis. I've essentially told you the current challenges we're facing, and we're going to get right to what our options are, what our strategy is, and then get to our options.
Do you have a comment, Ms. Reed?
Yeah, I just, we can certainly be to the point and be efficient with this presentation, but this is really an important topic to the community, and I want to be sure that we don't skip over things that people are going to have questions about or wonder about, and that we really give the public, they don't have the option of having this paperwork in front of us. So, yeah, we have a council meeting, we have all of that, but I think the most important thing is to do this correctly, and if we can't do it correctly today, then we should continue it to another day, but I don't want to race through it just because we have a schedule.
Ms. Friedman, that's totally up to you all. We can spend 2 hours on this, which is kind of what we allocated. Anything less than that, we'll abbreviate it. The line-by-line analysis has been on our webpage for quite some time. This has been vetted through the TPC 3 times in various formats. But absolutely, if there's an issue with time management, we'd rather come back and give you the full story.
Mr. Draymond.
I would echo that, and the reason is, I'm sorry, today seems to be I guess I go through periods of relative quiet up here, and then there are times when I have tons of questions about
What periods are those?
I'll let you know as we go along, but in terms of asking questions, I guess, but this is one of those that affects people across all spectrums, and you just go to the third slide, and you see who all those people are. Age, the age breakdown, and their need, and all of that. Every region is a little different, and we're talking about changing fares. I don't think I'm prepared to do this in 10, 15, 20 minutes, and I guess you probably have some speaker cards too.
Mr. Weaver, then Mr. Quintero.
Yeah, I suspect some of my colleagues might be wanting to postpone this. I don't care either way, but this has been properly noticed. We only have 4 speaker cards and a handful of people in the audience, so either they didn't get the word, or they're satisfied, or some other reason. Maybe they work for a living. They're not here. I don't know. They don't correlate.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, I'd like to sort of get a preliminary presentation. There is an awful lot of material, and it's way too important just to sort of rush through with limited questions and so forth. So from my perspective, let's hear the staff presentation, and then I think we're going to have to hold it over to another time.
Again?
Mr. Mayor, may I suggest then we'll have Ms. Engel go through the line-by-line analysis and spend some time. She is quite versed in this. Spend some time on that, and then we will lay out the options and reschedule the meeting for discussion on those options.
Public input. We have 4 cards.
Well,
Or
let's,
reschedule. It's up-
why don't we do this? Let's go through it and see how far we get. And there may be questions that you may need to come back for. We don't have a full council for a couple weeks.
Right. It would be October before I think we'd get it scheduled again for you. We could certainly do it, though. This ended up not being a good afternoon. I don't think we anticipated how long the homeless shelter would go or your closed session. If you want to bring this back, and I understand Mr. Quintero's interest, my concern is you'll have as much as we can abbreviate a presentation here today, we'll have to do it again when you come back.
Will we have to?
Yeah, that's...
Well, you won't have to, but in all likelihood, we'd need to review the material again in order for you to have your conversation and raise your questions.
Is this a public hearing, by the way?
No, it's just a study session, what we call a study session.
Looking for
Special
direction.
meeting. Yeah.
So here,
Mr. Friedman?
I think that we can, hear the presentation, get into it as far as we can, and then if we need to recess the meeting until another date, we've done that before without having to start over at the beginning. And
It's up to you.
Well, why don't we start in on it?
Sure.
Don't rush. What does John Wooden say? His words, hurry, be quick, but don't rush. said, not say, said.
Who did you say said that?
John Wooden?
I thought he said,
That was a Civil War veteran, general that first came up with that concept. You're right, John Wooden.
It was
did say
attributed
it.
to John Wooden. There's some people say there's no original thought.
I thought it was no leather sole shoes on the basketball court. That's what he came.
Okay, Ms. Engel.
Thank you. We'll start with the line by line, and it won't be quite rapid transit, but we'll do it as fast as we can. We want to give you a picture of the overall transit network in Glendale. We are very transit-rich in general compared to many communities. You'll see on your page that the metro lines are in pink, the Beeline routes are in blue, and you'll see we have very good coverage throughout our service area, which also includes service in the city of La Cañada, Flint Ridge. They purchase service from us. The key elements here that I'd like to highlight is our productivity of our weekday service. We're operating at almost 41 passengers per hour, and that is equivalent to the other regional service providers that do what we call serious regional service, even though we are a sub-regional service provider. The cost per passenger for our regular routes for all week is $1.87. These two numbers are going to be real important once you start to look at the other routes and recommendations that we are making for services. Next slide, please. One of the important things in delivery of service is kind of a policy decision of, do you make transit available to everyone in your service area, or do you make transit available to the people that need it most? In Glendale, we've done a pretty good job of balancing putting service where the highest demand for ridership is, yet not abandoning other portions of the community that don't have the traditional ridership orientation. So on your map, it does show in the areas of yellow and the two blues where the most predominant tendency to use public transit, where those areas are within the city, and you'll see the service routes also kind of mimic that. There is less service in the foothill corridor. There's also less demand in the foothill corridor and through the Verdugo channel that goes between Glendale and the Foothill Corridor. Next slide, please. Just a quick look at who our riders are. Most of our riders have ridden for more than 4 years, so we do have a very solid group of passengers that are long-term passengers with us. About 65% of the passengers are using the Beeline to go to work or to school. That's a very substantial number compared to other transit agencies. We have relatively very few discretionary trips. Next slide, please. Also, the age of our passengers is also very interesting. We have much more of a spread of who our ridership is. About 36% of our population is school-based, both intermediate and secondary school, plus the college. And we have a very large work population, ages 25 to 54, and it ranges between 44 and 55% of our population is taking our ridership population is taking the bus to work. So kind of the ages and the purpose of the trips mimic each other. We have, I think important to note is only 8% of our population 65 and over is using Beeline. Our Beeline buses are totally accessible for people that have mobility impairments. And so it is very flexible for folks that like to have spontaneity in taking their trips, but we also have a very robust dial-a-ride program, and so our passengers that are using dial-a-ride who are in the senior age category are usually a little bit lower because our dial-a-ride service is so robust. So what I'd like to do very quickly is kind of give a snapshot of each of the routes, and as we go through this for time, I'll let you know what those changes are that we're recommending as we go through the routes versus waiting till the end to sum that up. So on Route 1, Both Route 1 and Route 2 run on Central and Brand. One's counterclockwise, one's clockwise. It's a little bit disconcerting to people because you always think number 1 should be Brand because that's our main street, but that's really number 2. So we're recommending that we change that Route 1 be a Brand Boulevard, north and south, Route 2 be Central Avenue, north and south, just to make it simpler and easier for people to track. The ridership on Route 1 and Route 2 are very similar. So because of the counts and the way the buses are moving in that clockwise and counterclockwise rotation, the passengers per hour are about the same on both routes. So the key here is Route 1 and 2, even though they're our downtown corridor, are not our most productive service. There is lots of metro service also on Brand Boulevard. So we are recommending that we move from 20-minute service to 30-minute service on Brand and work with Metro's schedule so that we have buses that are paced out a little bit better so that people have selection of either a Metro bus or a Beeline bus, but they're not necessarily, hopefully, arriving at the same time. We're looking at trimming off the first and last trips due to low ridership, and those numbers are on your slide of how many passengers, 6 passengers or 17 passengers that would be affected by those reductions. Metro 92 does run on Brand, so there is some complimentary service that has longer duration, more hours.
What time is that? I'm sorry, the first trip and the last trip, what times are we talking about?
The first trip is about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the last trip at night is, I think, around 6:30. So it's after, there's not a lot of demand on those first and last trips. And then again, on Brand, there would be Metro service. The Metro service runs almost 24 hours and is also long-haul service between downtown and the Valley. Okay, so that's Route 1 and 2, similar things, first and last trips, and the 20-minute to 30-minute service. Route 3 then is our next. It's our largest route as far as ridership. One of our more productive routes. It's 46 passengers per hour. The cost per passenger trip is $1.66. Again, most of our trips you're going to see on routes 1 through 7 are going to be less than $2 per passenger to move that passenger for each of the trips. Now, our recommendations for Route 3, and the next slide will help us a little bit. Most of our passenger trips are between downtown Glendale and the college. 50%, down a little bit farther, John. There you go. 50% of our ridership travel just that one segment. Only about 10% of our ridership actually travel between the college and Montrose. And then the remainder of the ridership travels between Montrose and JPL. Now, the service on Foothill Boulevard is augmented by service that we provide for City of La Cañada to Flint Ridge, and they've actually moved ahead with their service changes and their implementation of service revisions, which now has them operating between JPL down to Montrose, where they used to end their service on Foothill Boulevard at Ocean View. So we do have some complementary interaction there with our Beeline Route 3 service and our La Cañada service. So for Route 3, our recommendations are to look at trimming the first and last trips, again, due to low ridership, and having every other trip that goes between downtown and the college extend to JPL. So it means we'll have a 20-minute service between downtown and the college, where most of our productivity is, but 40-minute service between downtown and JPL. So that would be the difference in the service. That saves us quite a lot of service hours and cost for that. What we'd like to do then with that cost savings is to add some additional what we call tripper trips that would run between downtown and the college, because we have severe overcrowding at what we call it. We don't have college bell times, but in the afternoon, in the morning, getting to the college at 8 o'clock, and then the 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock time period, leaving the college, going back home, we have standing room only, where at the beginning of the semester we have pass-bys because we don't have any more capacity on the buses. So currently we stick out a tripper. We want to make that part of our program for the beginning of the school years or anytime we have overcrowding, to be able to supplement our service to relieve some of that overcrowding. So in addition to the Beeline service in this corridor, we also have very significant Metro service. Metro 90 and 91 runs all the way from downtown Los Angeles up to Sylmar. So that's taking the western part of the Foothill community, is serving that. It runs also along, through the Verdugo corridor. It has capacity right now on its buses to absorb anyone that would shift between the Beeline to the Metro service. And the 9091 service, again, runs almost 24 hours and is fairly frequent service, running from 10 minutes in the morning to, I think it's a 18 or 20-minute midday schedule. Next slide, please. For Route 4, and again, here's where your numbers get really significant. Our passengers per hour for Route 4 are 67 passengers per hour. This is equivalent of regional service in most any other location. So this is very productive. This means all the buses are packed most of the time. We carry a lot of riders, and the cost per trip, because that route is so efficient, is $1.13. So we can move a lot of people on full buses and get them to their destinations. We are not recommending any changes to this route as far as service changes. The one thing, if we do have money left over by the time we remix and match everything, is we would want to put out some tripper service where we have overcrowding issues in the afternoon with school service that impacts this route. This route doesn't carry most of the load for the schools, but we do get the adult school for GCC that does provide us some additional peak ridership.
And again, a tripper service is just more buses on the route.
Yeah, it's an unscheduled bus that goes out and usually follows an existing scheduled bus to help relieve the overcrowding load. So that bus can just move ahead and discharge folks, and the next bus will pick up anybody that can't be picked up because there's no more space on the bus.
That's tripper service.
We call that tripper service. Thank you. Sometimes I get stuck in transit talk and
Yeah, you know it.
and don't translate that. So, thank you, Councilmember Weeder. For Route 5, this is service on Pacific Avenue. It also has high ridership of 45 passengers per hour at a cost of $1.70 per trip. What we'd like to do on this route is just fix the travel time. We have a little bit of on-time performance because of the passenger loads. So we'll add a few minutes here and there for every trip to fix the on-time travel time. And then we'll add a couple trips in the morning and in the afternoon for overcrowding. This route primarily serves the Hoover-Keppel Toll Complex, and we have typically standing loads during school hours or during the bell times for the schools on that service. On Route 6 is our Colorado service. It also serves Glendale High School. It operates almost 42 passengers per hour at a cost of $1.82 per passenger. It's also very productive service. We have the same issues because of the passenger loads to fix the travel time, which adds a little bit of money to the cost of that service. And then looking at the first and last trips where they're not as effective because of the lower ridership of 7 passengers or 15 passengers, we'll look at trimming that up just a little bit to save a few dollars. Also on Colorado Boulevard, for about 2/3 of the route, we have Metro 183 service. So we do have some complimentary service. We already schedule between the Metro buses so that there is efficient service along the corridor all day long. For Route 7, we call this our Glen Oaks route. It is it is the primary east-west route through our service area. It carries about 42 passengers per hour at a cost of $1.83 per trip. It serves the West Glendale portion. It also, on Glen Oaks Avenue, runs on top of Metro 92 service, but there's enough service in that corridor that it supports both Metro service and our service on Glen Oaks Boulevard. You'll see that we detoured up Pacific Avenue to get to the Glendale Toll Keppel complex, and we've had some interesting issues this year with the school population at both the college and at Hoover Toll Keppel having increased so much that the buses are arriving full. By the time they get to Hoover, that you can't get all the college kids on or all the high school kids on to get all the way across town. So we have been adding tripper service in the morning during that 8 o'clock peak period. The Route 7 then continues eastbound to Glendale College. We're not recommending any changes to this service. We had considered truncating the service in one of the options that you might have looked at least on the weekends, truncating it at Brand. But we'd like to, because it's the only real east-west corridor service that we have, we'd like to try and keep that intact. And the ridership is high enough for both weekdays and Saturday to warrant that. So we're looking at just fixing the travel time and then just trimming the last trip in the evening that had low ridership.
What time of day is that?
That's around 7 o'clock for the east-west. Okay, so the 1 through 7 are our core, what we call regular service. We have routes 11 and 12 that we'll talk about that are our express service from the Metrolink stations. Route 11 is from GTC to downtown. It has 33 passengers per weekday passenger hours. It only runs during the weekdays during peak service times in the morning and afternoon. The cost per passenger trip is $2.28. And we're looking at canceling the first trip in the afternoon because of the low ridership. The first trip's around 2:30, 2:45. And we don't have a lot of folks taking that back to the station at that time. So the productivity for Route 11 warrants keeping the service as it is. For Route 12, it's an interesting process that we've had in setting up this route that operates between the Glendale Transportation Center on the south and the Burbank Interregional Transportation Center on the north. Our difficulty oftentimes is trying to coordinate with the Metrolink trains and the Metrolink changes in schedules to be able to get buses on time to both stations to pick up folks as they exit the buses to be able to take them as an express either to along the San Fernando corridor, in this case either north or south on the San Fernando corridor. The trains, the Metrolink train service that serves each of those stations is very different. We have a number of folks that come from Riverside and Orange County that come north and exit at the Glendale Transportation Center. And then we have all the routes that come from Ventura or North County, Lancaster, Palmdale area that come south and exit in Burbank. All those folks, for the most part, for Route 12 are coming to work and are from their direction are going to work locations along the San Fernando Road corridor. Quite a few of them are going to the Grand Central area. Our passengers per weekday hour from the study is 15.9 passengers per hour at a cost of $4.81. And what's important to note is when we did the line-by-line analysis, and that's where this data for each of the routes comes from, it is a snapshot of one weekday day during the prime time of year, in our case November, that said what happens in that snapshot for the whole system for that one day. What we did on the next slide is take a look at the whole year, because with Route 12 and our recommendations looking at canceling service or abbreviating that service is what's really happening on that route for the whole year for the last couple of years. So we should probably take a look at the cost per passenger for the last 3 years. In 2008, with about 42,000 passengers, we were running about $10 per person to move a passenger in that corridor. Our ridership went up another 10,000 passengers in 2009. So our cost went down to about $8 per trip. And again, we've had improvements in ridership on that route in 2010, and we're up to about 61,000 passengers. But the cost per passenger still remains at $7.50 for this one route when you're looking at the rest of the service overall at under $2 a passenger to move them. So this is a very expensive route to operate and has a lot of, because of the meeting the trains on both stations, has a lot of expense built into it in order to make it function the way that it was designed.
So it's $7.50 because the PowerPoint says $4.81.
On the one-day snapshot for the one day of service, if you looked at how many passengers rode that service that day, it was almost 15 passengers per hour. But if you look at the whole year ridership, it's down to about 10 passengers per hour, because not everyone's riding every day of the trains and meeting the buses. But your cost to operate the service is the same every day, whether there's 5 people or 15 people that ride.
What MTA service do we have?
On the San Fernando Road corridor, we actually have 2 pieces of service. One is Route 94, which is the local metro service that runs all along the San Fernando Road corridor. There's also Metro Rapid Bus, which is 794, but it doesn't stop at all of the local stops that, in some cases, passengers trying to get to their work destinations, there wouldn't be necessarily a rapid stop at that location currently. We can work with Metro to maybe increase the number of stops in that corridor.
We got some emails from people who are using it, a company with over 60 employees. So if this is cut, they're not really going to have an MTA option.
There are a couple of facilities that are located on the San Fernando Road corridor, but don't have access to the other side of they don't have access to San Fernando Road because there's no real through passageway, like on Allen, for example, when Allen was closed. So there will be some pockets of employer groups or employers that do not have the immediate walkable access from San Fernando Road to their work site.
Ms. Friedman, then Mr. Draymond.
What would change in the terms of the cost if it was just a regular bus on that route without having to meet the trains?
The cost would probably be significantly lower, and off the top of my head, I would guess half.
Why isn't that the intermediary option, that we continue a bus service, but just not be so ambitious as to try to always be there when the train arrives?
Most of the time, we try to not duplicate what Metro service has in the same corridor. So right now, we're operating that corridor because we're doing more door-to-door type of service. So we pick them up at the station to deliver them closer to their work front doors. The Metro 94 service just runs along the corridor, and they have frequent service, but you'd have to walk from that service into the other areas.
I'm not suggesting changing where the bus goes. I'm saying, what if you did the exact same route and offered that same door-to-door type service, just didn't always try to meet the train?
It would be less expensive because we wouldn't run as many buses to meet different time train periods. So it may mean right now folks have to wait at the station sometimes 10, 15 minutes when they get off the train to get their bus. If we had regularly scheduled service, regardless of the train times, in order to be able to afford that cost, they might have to wait a half an hour depending upon when their train arrived and the time they would actually be able to depart the station to get to their location.
Mr. Zerner?
If I could, Ms. Engel, just this route was specifically set up for Metrolink commuters.
That's correct.
So that might, while we may pick up other passengers on a fixed route regular service, we may not accommodate the Metrolink folks. Doable, but we'd probably have to change our ridership target.
What is your recommendation for this route?
The staff recommendation, along with the commission, the Transportation and Parking Commission's recommendation, is to cancel Route 12 and look for alternative ways to offer similar service if we can find a way to self-fund this route or look at other options to either cut back service or something else that makes it more cost-effective for us. Compared to the 10 passengers per hour on this route to the other routes that we're operating closer to 40 passengers per hour, we think this is probably the more strategic place to make the cuts currently than affecting the regular service that is actually transporting more people.
Isn't this another situation where it's heavily used in the morning and afternoons, though?
We're only operating in peak AM and PM periods currently. So the cost to run the service is only for those about 3.5-hour period, both morning and afternoon.
Mr. Draymond.
Well, basically the question was asked, but when we're talking about all of this, to me, it's not just the particular routes. It's how the funding affects the overall program, and whether or not we're getting the best bang for the buck here. But even though this may have been designed to facilitate Metrolink, Councilmember Friedman's question is a great one, because if it becomes a more efficient route, not necessarily even more use, but if it becomes more efficient economically, if we're not meeting if the purpose is no longer a connector for Metrolink, we might want to look at that as an option, especially since we'll be coming back to this. I mean, if that's a possibility, I'd like to know.
Well, I'm also would just be curious. I know that I've taken Metro, quite a few times, and I know they don't often run on time, or they don't run on time as much as they would like to. But I'm curious.
Metro.
The one that's at the
Metrolink is the train. Metro is the general bus and
No.
Metro Rail.
Metrolink.
Metrolink.
So I've taken that, from downtown to Glendale quite a bit, and I know that they run not on time as much as they run on time. But still, it'd be nice, when you come back, it would be nice to know if we did just put this bus on a schedule that approximated when they were supposed to arrive, how much of a delay there really would be. Because, if it's every now and then you have to wait an extra 10 or 15 minutes, that's one thing. But if it's that more often than not they actually are closer to on time, I mean, that's an option that might make sense then, just running it on a schedule and hoping that people are understanding if their train is late and they missed that first bus. So I would like to see some numbers as to when the actual Metrolink trains are really arriving, depending on, versus when they're scheduled to arrive.
And Ms. Friedman, we can do that. When we get to the end of the presentation and lay out all the options, we can add that to the list and then have a discussion on all of them together, but bring you back some revised options as well.
I would appreciate that.
My concern is, we're trying to develop a creative corridor. We're trying to bring employers. It's so interesting. One of the employers that did finally come to downtown Brand that I interviewed with, along with Ken Hitz, I couldn't believe what a big deal they were making out of the connection from Metrolink to downtown Brand. They were completely, I had to really, really assure them that the B line would be there, et cetera, et cetera. They were formerly in Hollywood. They had an inordinate amount of employees that came from either south of the downtown or sort of the west side, and it was a major concern to them. So anyway, I think to do what we can to maintain the line.
Mr. Draymond?
Yeah, I agree. It's counterintuitive to say that we are trying to create a creative corridor along San Fernando Road and to cancel the route. So maybe the option is the fact that it maybe is more for businesses to, I don't know, maybe to make the route just more efficient by cutting the costs, by trying to meet the trains, but just not. I don't know. It just seems counterintuitive at this point to cut the route if that's the direction we're trying to go with the San Fernando corridor. Anyway.
Thank you for the comments, and we'll come back to you with kind of a series of things we can do for Route 12. A couple are in your package. We talked about, do we just operate out of GTC to Alameda, to the western side of Grand Central? It saves us about $100,000. But we still have a big hole to plug if we were to make that option, or to say, do you want to just operate out of the Burbank station to Grand Central and let other folks ride Metro 94 from GTC into the Grand Central area? So there's a lot of options. We can price all of those out as far as what that impact to our plan would be, and then have that part of your discussion process. We did have a meeting today, and John may talk about this a little bit later. We did have a meeting with the TMA this afternoon with representatives from DreamWorks and Disney. They are very interested in trying to retain the route for the same purposes as we'd all like to have transportation in that corridor. One of the things we did bring up to them is what are some of those options you might have to have employers help subsidize, create a pool of money to be able to operate that service. I think they're facing the same kind of budget financial restrictions that we are saying, how do you make it all work so that the passengers are happy, the employers are happy, and we can still actually operate the service. They've given us some feedback. Some of the feedback is on your public comment, and as we continue discussions with them for alternatives, we'll bring that back to you. The next route that some of you will fondly remember is our Glen Oaks Canyon special service. It's morphed into many different pieces of service over the years. Originally, it was Metro's 201 service that ran from downtown up to the end of the canyon. A few years back, Metro cut it back to the hospital, and we kind of stepped in temporarily to see if we could do something on the city side to provide service. We ran all-day service in the canyon with very little increased productivity. Metro was having 2 passengers per hour ride. We had the same productivity during our experimental all-day service. We cut it back to just a few trips up and down the canyon, and then we extended the route thinking, well, gosh, maybe they need to ride farther, make a better connection. We extended the Route 12 from the canyon into downtown. All the ridership we picked up was between the hospital and downtown, which duplicates most of the service. So still our passengers from the canyon, from the canyon in the downtown is 15 passengers per hour. Just in the canyon itself is our 2 passengers per hour. It costs us about $40,000 a year and about $6 per person per trip. So both staff and TPC is recommending that we cancel that service. What we did provide for you is kind of we went out and surveyed in the last week because we'd heard, there's more ridership, our kids are riding it to school. We went out, tested that concept, surveyed 100% for all week, all the trips that we did, and you'll see that our ridership per hour is the same as it's been for the last 4 years, hovering right a little over 2 passengers per hour.
I'm sorry, can you clarify, because you do have that demand between the hospital and the downtown. Are you suggesting canceling the whole route or just continuing that section?
Canceling the whole route. There is the Metro 201 service that's very popular that runs between the hospital and downtown. So that little segment that we're operating is really duplicate service from other services either we're providing or Metro's providing. And with that even that ridership on that segment is still lower than what our normal threshold would be. We always look for even policy-based routes to be at least 20 passengers per hour to really warrant the investment of resources to operate them. So anything that's less than 20 passengers, we really come back and take a look at, is there another way to do this? Is there a more efficient way? Is there other service that really would make up for the demand on that route? So just to do a kind of a quick visual of the things that we just talked about. Next slide, please. If you're just taking a snapshot of where our ridership is, this is not passengers per hour. This is really overall ridership for the weekday service. You'll see our routes 3, 4, and 7 are our core routes. The routes that we're suggesting to cancel are routes 12 and 13 on the bottom. You'll see our routes 1 and 2 that we're looking at reducing a little bit of service is kind of in the middle range of our productivity for our route. We're almost at a point of coming to the conclusion of what is the core of our line by line. Next slide. We do have in your packet, if you want to do a snapshot of which routes operate which days and what our productivity is. This is a chart of our boardings per revenue hour. This is what tells us, transit folks, how many people are we moving and are we effectively moving the most people we can, because we're all about mobility. So we want to try and keep those routes that are over 20 passengers per hour. 40 passengers per hour is doing really well. Anything that's in the 50s to 60s, we're doing so well we have overcrowding issues and we need to look at, can we put more service on that route to make it a more comfortable ride and more effective ride. So that's a snapshot of Beeline for what our service is, and I'll defer to Steve if we want to continue or if we with our financial assessment.
I think Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and members of the council will if you're so inclined, we'll move into sort of the objectives and then roll out some of the service revisions. Ms. Engel has touched on most of those. We'll go back over those. And then I think spend a little bit more time on the fares, at least the proposal of the fares.
Let me ask my colleagues, how much further do you want to,
For me, this is a good time to...
a good time? What about the
But
public? Should we
the
at least
rest.
hear, I think we
Yeah.
should at least hear from the public who's here because they may not be able to come back. Okay? So we have, I believe these are the cards. First is Richard Espiritu, followed by Bob Getz.
Mayor Pro Tem.
3.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council and staff. I am Richard Espiritu. One of the things that I'd like to make a comment is this package that I picked up today was not online. I wish it had been online previously. One of the interesting things here, and this is toward the very end, it has the fee schedule of various routes with the senior citizens and the regular fee schedules. According to my understanding, and I happen to do this myself, the Metrolink MTA has what is called peak fare hours and non-peak fare hours. As a senior citizen, I could hop on any MTA bus during a non-peak hour, including Saturday or Sunday, for 25 cents. One of the problems that I'm having with the fee schedule here with the fare increases, which we're not really getting into yet, is the fact that the senior citizens who have a fare pass for $4.50, that's getting jumped up to $13.50. That's nearly a 300% fare increase. I would like, when we get to that issue of fare increases, I would seriously like to see something in the neighborhood of changing the increase of $4.50 to $13.50 for the seniors and disabled. I'm not really against the fare increase from 25 to 75 cents because that's something that should have happened over the period of years. I don't like that sudden increase, but that's what has happened. I would really like to see something, us to take another look at our senior citizens and disabled people within the community of Glendale. Because I can ride from Glendale to visit my son in Santa Monica for a whopping 50 cents. One way, 50 cents on the way back. And that's from Glendale, North Glendale, all the way to the Santa Monica airport, which is quite a trip. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bob Getz?
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. I'm Bob Getz, resident of Northwest Glendale. I do intend to be back here, so I'll make my comments today very brief. What brought me here today was the subject of the fare increase. When I first came across the proposal to increase the basic or the base rate some 300% over 2 years, I flinched. And I really, wondered, my first thought was, what effect will this have on our ridership? Now, our gut, and my gut, and I suspect even your intuition, will make you think that there's going to be an impact on ridership. We're going to lose riders as a result of this. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chart that's here in this packet, and even now I can't see what the elasticity levels are, so I don't know whether some of these options would have less impact on our ridership loss. But I do recall seeing in one of the earlier staff reports that a consultant to the city estimated that that proposal, 300% over 2 years, would result in about a 40% loss in ridership. I don't know whether that estimate still stands, and I don't know what the content of that estimate is. But that's enough to scare anybody. If that's the case, this city will in fact be doing just the opposite. We will be losing riders instead of trying to increase them. And a loss of that magnitude would throw the dollars per rider out of whack completely. You'd be, instead of looking at $4 and $5 a rider, you'd be looking at a lot more, even with increased revenues. So I intend to look over this material, which I received today, and I hope to be able to get a copy of the more detailed report, and we'll be back here to fine-tune my comments about that. I think that you really have to have another option, and that option is to perhaps not lower the target rate of $1, but to implement those increases much slower over a longer period of time, which would tend not to scare people quite so much. And so I would like to get into that with more detail and see what the staff have done with the consultant, and look forward to discussing with you again the next time you talk about this.
Thank you. Mike Mohill.
Pardon my appearance, Mr. Mayor. I had surgery and I'm hobbling along, so I'm the best I can. I'd like to, first of all, Mike Mohill, long-term resident of Glendale. I would like to ditto the comments by Mr. Espiritu and Mr. Getz. I'd like to add a couple of comments. Number one, how long do you think this recession is going to last? I predict 5 years. You think there'd be less people taking the bus or more? Personal experience. My wife takes the bus from Harvey Drive and the 134 freeway to Sherman Oaks. About 8 people are on the bus each way, maybe 12, 13. Okay? When we had the spike in gasoline prices, the bus was full going both ways. Couldn't find a seat, she'd tell me. Now that we're in the recession, they're lucky to have 8 people on that bus going any time of the day. Why? Why is there less ridership? It's obvious. People are not working. This recession is going to last a long, long time. We need to find more money to fund the buses. Public transportation is going to become more and more important. I know Councilwoman Friedman had mentioned the importance of public transportation in the past. So is Mr. Najarian. We must find additional money. I don't know how you're going to do it. Cutting the hours, early hours, late hours, all you're doing is discouraging people from taking the transportation. People want to know that, I can go at 8 o'clock in the morning if I want to, or I can go at 6 o'clock at night. But to start at 9 o'clock, why even have a route? What's the purpose of public transportation? I've been told that, the purpose of public transportation is not to make a profit. Okay, let's be that way. We have to find other funding. As far as eliminating Route 3 or 13, I think it is, that went out to Glen Oaks Canyon where I live, people who live out in Glen Oaks Canyon, they pay taxes like everybody else. And just because there's low ridership doesn't mean they don't use it. I know there are a lot of people who work in Glen Oaks Canyon who use that bus route. Okay? So as far as cutting any of the bus routes, on the contrary, we have to find the money. And again, we need public transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Brooke. Here, Person.
Thank you, council members and mayor. I am very encouraged. I am here on behalf of Route 12. It has been my pleasure for the past 14 years to be the executive director of the Glendale TMA. And I work with the large companies on flour, and I work with a couple small companies on flour. They have always supported the Glendale TMA, offered programs to encourage their employees to take alternative commutes. You know, the vein of our existence is the single occupant vehicle driving to work. You know, that is our nightmare day in and day out. And we work so hard to get employees to take Metrolink, and we have been so supportive of Metrolink. The Glendale City Council has been supportive. After the Northridge earthquake, they worked to create this Route 12 to help people get to work when the freeways were closed. And it is a very grave concern of those companies that something will happen to Route 12. If you look at the figures that Ms. Engel has provided you, Route 12 and Route 11 has a difference of 21 riders per week. Yet the cost is so much higher for Route 12. And a lot of that is because Route 12 is such a long route that it takes a lot of buses, drivers' time, fuel, those kinds of things to support the route. The Glendale TMA members that are involved in Route 12 are all on flour. Some of them would be inconvenienced, but in talking to the employees one-on-one, they're all in agreement to have Route 12 go to the Burbank Metrolink station, come down Flower, turn on to Grandview, go to San Fernando Road, and then go back up to the Burbank Metrolink station. This will cut your route mileage tremendously, will cut your driver's hours, and would probably even make your timing better. So that's something that we're proposing as you look at routes. However, I will tell you, thank you so much. I came in here so discouraged, and I'm so much more encouraged hearing your compliments. I am here for any questions. Please contact me anytime about Route 11 or 12. That's what I'm here for, to be a resource to you. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe Bill Wiseman was here. Did he leave?
Mr. Mayor, he had to leave, so he couldn't make any comments because of another appointment that he had.
Okay. Ms. Friedman.
I have a question for staff. About this consultant number, that if we raise the fares X amount, we'll have this big drop-off. I have a question. First, what's the cost right now for a Metro bus?
It's $1.50.
Okay, so the implication is that if you raise the fares, people they're going to, that 40% means they're going to stay home. They're not going to take the bus. But is it really more of the case that they'll just use Metro more as an option? I mean, is some of that 40% people saying, you know what, now that there's such the fares, I mean, it's still Beeline's much under Metro, but now it's a little bit closer, so now I'm not going to wait the extra 40 minutes, half an hour for that bus, I'll take this other bus?
We didn't get far enough in our report to be able to answer the whole fare question and the fare elasticity, but I'll try and do it very quickly.
You know, just since people brought it up, and they'll be talking about it between now and the next time we get together.
I'm sure they will. In your attached to the back of your packet is a little worksheet that we did. It's in black and white of if we were to take the standard industry fare elasticity math and apply it to Glendale Beeline, what we think would happen. And so you do see a drop-off in passengers in ridership of 24%, and it goes 30 and 40 through the different scenarios. Typically, that fare elasticity is applied to an organization like Metro that already has a $1.50 fare, and you say, we're going to double that fare to $3. What is the fall off on ridership because of that significant impact? Because our fares are only 25 cents, the whole fare elasticity process doesn't really apply to us because we're so far outside, it's really an anomaly. But we did run the math to say in the worst case scenario, if that were to happen in Glendale, how many folks would move to another service? So maybe they're going to give up their taking a trip if they were only to take a trip 4 blocks because the Beeline's there, they're only going to pay a quarter. Maybe they'll choose to walk instead. Instead of taking multiple trips, maybe they'll combine multiple trips into one because there's a higher fare. So it may cause them to think, how do I become more effective with my 75 cents versus the 3 trips I could take before? If they're doing a lot of traveling between Beeline and Metro, they might say, well, gosh, maybe I need to select either a Beeline pass or a Metro pass. And so you'll have some fallout where they'll say, I need to go longer distances more often, so I'm going to migrate over to Metro. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to lose them to bus ridership. It just may not be that route or the Beeline versus Metro. The other option would be to buy a Beeline pass in our fare scenario. We've offered passes at a discount. So for those riders that ride frequently, there's kind of an encouragement to ride often and use the pass to be able to bring down that cost per trip for them personally. So we do have a lot of options, but their option, if we're not to operate, would be to pay $1.50 on Metro. So the chances of us falling off in that 40% rate, we think, is very slim, but we wanted to run the numbers to at least know, gosh, if everything went south, what would that be? And to know that the chances of us having probably more than a 10-15% drop in ridership doesn't seem wouldn't fit for our demographics and the fare rate we're looking at increasing.
Mr. Weaver?
On Route 12, how often do they run?
It actually runs to meet trains, so it's on a scheduled basis, but it's not typical.
If you took it off the schedule, they're running all day long?
No, it's only running in the morning from, Cindy's our expert on Route 12. Come on up.
Oh, till about...
This is Cindy Butali, who's our transportation assistant. She is intimately familiar with Route 12.
Hi. Councilman Member Weaver, the Route 12 runs from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then again in the afternoon from 2:45 till about 5:45 to 6.
So you're addressing the people going and coming from work, period?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to hold my other questions till the next time we...
Well, if it pleases the council, in your line-by-line analysis, we can send you some information. It has the ridership, the boardings and alightings on Route 12, so we can help to give you some additional background information just on that route, because it is very complicated with who gets on where and where they're going to, and what their ultimate destination is. It's kind of a mixed bag. It's a little bit complicated.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I can inject, if I'm not mistaken, I made a note that our next full council would be October 12th. Does that sound right?
Really?
So that was the date I was going to suggest we come back, but of course, that's just throwing that out for discussion.
Well, let me suggest we not set it to a date certain. Let's look at the agendas and we'll get a date and then we'll let everybody know.
Or that.
Yeah, because...
Okay, did everyone make comments? I have a couple comments that maybe that can carry over to the next. First off, Route 12, the whole purpose is to meet the trains at the Metrolink station. Otherwise, I don't think that its main goal is to provide intra-city service along San Fernando Road. So the whole point is to get those people from the Creative Campus to the train station and from the trains back up. It also serves a very important purpose because it does cross over into the city of Burbank. And we, not too long ago, several months ago, entered into a memo of understanding with Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena to form the Tri-City Transportation Cooperative. We have a name for that? Was it official name? Tri-City Transportation. The reason we did that, the reason we combined with them, with our two neighboring cities, was to present an argument to Metro that, due to our size, and I know you had one of those slides there, that we're a significant operator, if you will. We became a mega maybe isn't the word, but a significantly large operator.
Tier 2 eligible operator.
Right, to become a Tier 2 eligible operator. That was a major push and an effort in Metro to stick our I mean, I don't want to use a vulgar analogy, but to obtain, to be one of the select few of operators, of eligible operators who receive funding from the MTA through their growth over inflation pot. This year, what are we expecting to get? Several $100,000.
Mr. Mayor, the total that we were allocated over 3 years is 1.8 and some change, so we got about $600,000 this year and then the next 2 years.
Okay. So I guess the point is that Route 12 gives us that, it lets us pass that red face test that, in fact, we are, if someone, and believe me, they're trying to shoot down, it's a scramble for funds at Metro, and there would be no hesitation on the part of any of those other eligible operators to say, oh, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, that's just a sham. They're just scamming us. They're not connected in any way. Route 12, as thin a reed as it may be, is a connection where we can legitimately say that we are providing inter-city service to Glendale, or from Glendale to Burbank, Burbank to Glendale. So I think when we decide what we're going to do with that route, we need to not just look at the numbers, but go beyond and realize that it may play an important role in justifying legitimately our $600,000 a year infusion that we're getting from the MTA. So that's one point. Another point is I am constant, and I think we have to throw this out there, although I'm personally against it. I am continuously tapped on the shoulder by folks from the Foothill Transit Agency who operate several cities' bus lines. And the proposition is, why don't you let us take a look at your system? You can still be called the B-line, but let us come in there, and with our size of organization, we may be able to do your bus service for significantly cheaper per hour than you're currently doing it. As I said, I think we would lose some autonomy in the operation of the B-line, but it's something that needs to be a part of a full discussion of our bus operations. I would like to, next time we come back, look at we're talking about the elasticity of the ridership in relation to the increase in fares. Take a look at the Metro numbers. Metro's percent increase was a lot less, obviously, than ours. As Catherine said, we're an aberration going from 25 cents to 75 cents. It's a 200% increase. Throws off all your calculations. But look at what Metro ridership did. It did dip initially, but I think it's coming back to pre-fare increase levels. And Metro went through a really tortured discussion on raising the bus fares. Ultimately, they did. I agree with the speaker who said these should be a progressive increase through the years. Our last increase we went from 0 to a quarter, right? 15 years ago?
Yes.
So that's really tough, and we've got to continually adjust, at least to keep pace with inflation, so we don't get sticker shock, give the public sticker shock. If someone could come back and tell me what the effect of a completed TAP system on Metro means for Glendale. TAP system is a transit access pass. It's it's a little card that you can charge up with money. The point is that you buy it through Metro, but if you use a municipal operator, that there'll be some fare percentage coming back to that operator. Is that something significant that may affect our outlook? And of course, Metro has been fooling around with that TAP system. It's been, I can call it a failure. No one else can, but I can call it a failure. And we're hoping, though, that will get turned around and straightened out. Last point, maybe at our next meeting. Tell us what that trolley is doing, the Caruso trolley. Is that a significant transportation provider, or is it just well, I won't use any other analogy, but tell us if it's a significant transportation issue. Mr. Draymond.
The implementation of a rate fare is something that I was going to hold all my comments, but I guess I
These
agree.
are questions for come back with information.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll call them a question instead of a comment. But I would like to see a phasing of our fare increase if we decide to do that. I use Beeline about 3 days a week at least, and I almost feel embarrassed paying the quarter. I know we can show our ID, but I don't do that, and it's just. In any case, 75 cents seems reasonable, but I agree with several of the speakers and several of my colleagues that it should be implemented in a staged manner. But also, I have some questions about that I would like to hear more about when we come back, and that's with regard to the portion of Route 3, the portion that accesses the non-Glendale part of La Crescenta and La Cañada, and how it's subsidized, and how we operate there, and how La Cañada pays for that, and the quote new part of that, or the duplicative part, or that Ms. Engel was talking about, and where that now goes. I just want to point out that I'd also like to know if it's possible. So I was looking at the report, just on, let's see, slide 5, the onboard survey and the trip purposes. Did we break that out at all? I mean, this is the overall Beeline, but do we break it out, trip purposes by area or route? It's not it wasn't in the PowerPoint, but I'm curious, because in areas where we have, let's say, a larger concentration of seniors, it may be more for medical, say, in the western corridor of Honolulu Avenue than it is in some other part of the city. And I'm interested to know about that, because part of this is a public service as well as just a profit and loss. So I also want to know that as well. And I don't mean specifically just that part of the city. I just mean in general. Did we break this out, this trip purposes portion of the survey by route? You do. Okay, good. Because I'd like to talk about that later. And then, and one other thing related to Route 3 is that it would have been. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It's on page 5 of the smaller version of this. It was, so I don't know what that equates to in the larger one, but it's the one Route 3, Glendale, Verdugo, Foothill. 3,710 weekday riders, right? And 39% of that is doing this Montrose to JPL portion of that. So almost 40% of that route. That's around 1,500 riders per week. It only operates weekdays. Per week are doing that section. And that's more than a lot of these routes. In fact, more than most of the routes, weekdays. Just that portion of it. It sounds like a screaming need for a circulator to me. I mean, we talk about a circulator on Bram Boulevard. And Bram Boulevard, the Route 1 and 2, neither of those have 1,500 weekday riders. Yet we talk about a circulator there. So these are some of the questions I'm going to want to address when we come back.
Ms. Friedman, then Mr. Quintero.
Not to draw this out, but since we're asking questions to be answered next time, I think it'd probably be better for you if I just ask them now, and that way you could be prepared later. So I have just had a couple of questions. One is, those feeder buses that were running because of overcrowding, I mean, it seems like most of them surround the high school, but I'm also wondering if any of that is because of the fare difference between Beeline and Metro, whether people who would normally take Metro on certain routes are waiting to take the Beeline because it's so much less money, and if by raising the fare we discourage that a little bit, whether we may not need some of those feeder buses. So that's one question. The other question is, it seemed that you were implying that we're low on some senior riders because of the success of Dial-A-Ride. So, saying this without any prejudice, this is not leading anywhere, I'm curious as to whether the Dial-A-Ride service is so much better for those people that it justifies the loss of those riders to the bus system, and thereby perhaps reducing the bus availability to everybody, and what the economic analysis is, Dial-A-Ride versus well-equipped buses, maybe with expanded, routes, that kind of thing. I'm wondering if you've done any analysis about running an hourly bus up to 11 o'clock at night. I mean, I know you're recommending to have less buses, but I'm just wondering if there's anybody who would use the bus at night besides maybe myself. And I don't know how you're going to really answer this question, but one of the reasons that I have felt discouraged from using Metro, and I've expressed this before, is the lack of clear signage, maps on the bus stations. I have yet to see one Glendale bus station that has a map in it, which is incredible to me. So I've, decided to walk home instead of taking buses because I just have no idea where the buses go. So I don't know if we've looked at cities that have maps at the bus stations, schedules, that kind of thing, and try to do any analysis of putting some money into that and making it friendlier for people, not just in Glendale, but people who are coming from out of town, and whether that would help increase our ridership. We don't know. I don't even think we advertise our fare, our quarter fare, on those bus stations. So what do we think about that kind of putting money into clear signage and how that translates into increased ridership and revenue? And then the last thing is those areas that aren't served right now, on that first slide where it showed the demand. It's interesting because the areas that aren't served have this low demand. Well, if they're not served, how do you know what the demand is? That's my question. Is it because you once had a route there 20 years ago and no one took it, so we're just assuming it's the same thing? Or those people don't walk 3 miles to get to a bus, and therefore we assume that they don't want to ride a bus? Or you don't get phone calls from them? I mean, how do we know that the far north, above Foothill have no demand, is what it looks like? Or how do you know? Now, I know I live in Northwest, and I know that you've had complaints about buses running up and down Kenneth, but as at least one resident that would like to have bus service in that area, how do you really know that the people that are above Kenneth really don't want to take a bus, as your slide seems to imply? So that's something I'd like to see as, come back as a discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Quintero, then back to Mr. Green.
I'll have more questions next time around, but I'm also wondering, I also noticed the numbers from Montrose to JPL. I'd like to know a little bit more about that relationship, how it works, and financially how the shuttles are funded. And the same with the Dial-A-Ride. I'm still not, and I'd love to meet with the staff and maybe get a little more information, but I'm curious about the Dial-A-Ride and how it works and who's eligible and what it costs. Some of those numbers would be interesting to know.
Mr. Greenman.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Another question I have that comes out of this, again, about that section of La Crescenta that is City of Glendale. We have no service there. The only service we have, of course, is the portion that is paid for in some way, subsidized by City of La Cañada. So if they weren't doing that, would we just be writing off everything north of Montrose in terms of public transit? I mean, in terms of Beeline service, rather? I just, and it's essentially the same question that was asked, but I mean, if you have never offered ridership, people don't expect ridership. So how do you gauge the demand? So see all these questions that you've promoted, you've caused.
On a personal note, Route 3 has saved my rear. My son takes it twice a day to school at Rosemont and back, and sometimes my other son takes it as well down Foothills. So I think it's a great, personally, I think it's the best line. But
Mr. Mayor, if I
take it for 75 cents.
If I could
yes, they will. I'll pay $2 a trip.
$2 a trip.
I mean, for the value,
Sold.
the marginal value to me is
Sold.
it's priceless. Okay, so that was some.
Before we close, I just want to thank the staff, starting with Ms. Engel and Mr. McDamian and the Director of Public Works, Steve Zern, and the two staff members. You guys did a tremendous job, and this is really a comprehensive presentation, so I want to thank you for that.
Mr. Weaver.
If you're going to look at areas that haven't been asked if they like one, then look at Chevy Chase Canyon. They've never had any. Okay? It's only money.
Mr. Howard, so we have a date certain. We will continue this to.
It doesn't have to be continued. It'll come back.
Just put it back on.
Check the agendas to make sure that not full.
Jim, microphone.
That date Steve suggested, you've got the water rate discussion coming back. Probably not a day you want this on.
We'll leave that. We'll leave that to Mr. Starbird, your staff, to pick a date. Then we will take no action on this. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A special meeting is adjourned.
Now we got
Don't go
redevelopment.
anywhere.
We have one more
meeting.
agency.